Yeah, time is yours. And it's time to talk about injuries. So, obviously, he learned from the best, and nobody gives him better than Andy Reid. But in all seriousness, Ruben Randall will be back next week in a limited fashion at mandatory minicamp. And also, Nolan Carroll and Ja'Cory Shepherd are going to be full goes. So that's very, very important because the cornerback situation has been a concern to this point. Nolan Carroll specifically should step in right, maybe even with the first team.
Yeah, and Jordan Hicks, too, had the quad spasm getting treatment. He'll be back out there next week, too. So it seems like good news. And the Ruben Randall stuff, good news as well, is there was some talk that he might not be back till training camp.
Yeah, and I think more in his case it's going to be limited, maybe just individual drills at minicamp. But that's a step forward. There probably won't be much teamwork, but he'll be ready to go come training camp, and that's the important part of it. And, you know, one of the things today, Josh Huff had his best day of the spring by far, so maybe he's finally got the memo that it's time to turn it on because he looked like a completely different player today.
Interesting. All right. Well, there's a lot of big things today, I thought, that Coach Peterson covered, starting with maybe the biggest question of all, his opinion on whether Fletcher Cox will be there on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think it's most people's opinion that he will be here, and you never know 100% he shows up. But remember, he still makes a significant amount of money this season. You can start to get fined for the mandatory stuff in minicamp. They're not all that significant. So if he really wants to prove a point, he could certainly hold out, and that's not going to affect him that much. But by all accounts, Fletcher's going to be here. The Eagles believe it. Most of his teammates believe it. And I would be a little bit stunned if he doesn't show up on Tuesday.
Now, he said that Howie Roseman has been in contact with his agent and that Deuce Staley is the one kind of conversing with Darren Sproles. What's the feeling on Sproles? And why is there any reason why Sproles, is he just doesn't want to be here? Is he feel slighted? Do we have any idea what the real reason that Darren Sproles isn't here for?
Well, there's some speculation on with Fletcher. It's obvious they're trying, and that's why Howie's in negotiation with his agent because they're trying to work out a long-term deal. There's been conflicting reports about Darren. Some people say he's not happy with his contract. He wants an extension, maybe a little bit more guaranteed money up front. And others are saying, and Doug has kind of intimated that he's a veteran guy. He's 33 years old, and he just wants to spend some more time with his family out in San Diego. And he does do a number of things as far as coaching with his family and things like that. So it's possible in his scenario that he just really doesn't want to be here for volunteers. And by the definition of that word, obviously, there's nothing you can do about it if you're the Philadelphia Eagles. So Darren's a little more confusing than Fletcher, but you know, both are expected to be here actually on Monday for the mandatory physicals. And then they'll have to meet the media on Tuesday, and we'll try to get as many answers as possible. As I said, with Fletcher, you know what the issue is. With Darren, it's more up in the air.
John, Doug Peterson went kind of in-depth today on what he's seen from the quarterbacks. What did you take from his answer on what he's seen from this quarterback group that's getting paid a lot of money?
Well, it's the same. It's the status quo. Sam's number one, and Chase Daniel's number two, Carson's number three. And I think a lot of people are having trouble with the dichotomy of he has set this depth chart, but others, namely Frank Reich, Jim Schwartz, are saying it's an open competition. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. What Doug was trying to say today is he wants to foster an environment of competition, and he wants everybody to be shooting for a starting job. But as we stand here today in early June, Sam Bradford's the number one quarterback. That hasn't changed in the head coach's mind. And if anything, this was the first day where you could say he looked significantly better than either Chase Daniel or Carson Wentz. So I don't think anything has changed to this point, and as we go through the mini camp and head toward training camp, when it starts in late July, Sam Bradford's going to be the number one quarterback at that time, and the other guys, it's their job to push them and to compete with them, and that's what Doug was trying to get across.
Well, John, you kind of touched on what my question was, that Doug Peterson said so many times, Sam's my number one. Yes, I've made that clear. Sam's my number one. But is there like a caveat to that? Like, what if Wentz plays and looks better in training camp?
Well, there is a caveat to it. The caveat's that Carson Wentz is the future of this team. And, yeah, if he plays lights out come training camp, there's no reason to say he can't open up the competition. But that's not what the Eagles expect. They want to bring him along slowly. And again, I think people look at it in black and white, and it's more nuanced than that. It's the matter of they want Sam to be the number one quarterback, but they want Carson to push him as quickly as possible. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it hasn't changed, and that's always been Doug's philosophy from day one. So I think people who are looking for a so-called open competition, the fact that they're in the NFL and the fact that everybody's shooting for a job as the open part of the competition, doesn't necessarily mean that Doug has changed his mind on the plan for this season moving forward.
Now, OTAs is what we've wrapped up today. Next week, mandatory. So other than that word mandatory, is next week's camp any different than what they've done the last couple of weeks?
Well, a little bit in that obviously everybody has to be there. It's a little bit more structured, like a typical NFL practice, but because of the CBA, there's no hitting or nothing of that nature. And you're going to have the 3 straight days, which not only are full-scale practices, but every single one of them is open to the media. So you're going to get a better indication of where this team is as far as what their thinking is going into the season, of who stands where on the depth chart, even though Jim Schwartz will tell you there is no depth chart. There certainly is. It might be nebulous. It might be written in pencil, as Chip Kelly might say, but it exists, and we're going to see it pretty much full-fledged by next week.
John, there are a bunch of undrafted rookies that are in camp. Have any of those guys stood out to you? Do any of them have a shot of making the team in your mind after you've seen them up close in person?
Well, they've started all the undrafted rookies slowly. In most of them, they haven't really shifted and given them an opportunity past the third team. So basically where we stand here, you kind of look at what they did as far as signing these guys. And, for instance, Darryl Green, the offensive guard, they gave over $100,000 in guarantees, which is extraordinary for an undrafted player. So you have to think they regard him very highly. Mike Tavares, the linebacker, was given over $90,000. And those are the 2 guys that are, by the way, the highest in the entire NFL, not just Philadelphia. So the Eagles think highly of those guys, but they've started them off very, very slowly. Tavares specifically, I think, has a chance just because the Eagles lack so much depth at linebacker. They need somebody to line up behind the starters, and he's going to get every opportunity to open some eyes come training camp.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, covers the Eagles, and I thought it was interesting today, John, about Wisnewski is a guy who, that in practice he's taken a lot of snaps at center, but it seems that that's not the plan for him moving forward, which is kind of a head-scratcher.
Well, I think the plan for him is to be a backup, and he has been main. In fact, every time we've been there, all his reps have come at center. But I think as we get later in the process, they kind of know he's a veteran guy. He can play any inside position, and right now they have him earmarked to be a backup. And to be a reserve offensive lineman in this league, you have to be versatile, and you have to be able to play more than one position. And for interior guys, that means center and both guard positions, and he can do that. What I think the surprise is, I and a number of other people thought he was going to be able to push for that starting left guard slot, and I think this new coaching staff is sort of like the old one, and that they think very highly of Alan Barber. I know a lot of us disagree with that, but they believe in him, and it looks like Wisnewski is going to settle in as a backup, and he's not going to have an opportunity to win that job.
Yeah, and do they see him competing with Kelsey? Do they see him competing with Barber? Do they look at him more as a, swing guy? I mean, is he in a position to win a job? It sounds as if they don't really view him as a starter.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I know Jason Kelsey had a bad year by his standards, and everyone's a little bit down on him, but he's a no doubt about it starter for this team. There's no questioning him as the center of this organization, so he's not going to push him. The logical spot was Barber, as I said, at left guard. It looks like that's going to be a battle between Barber and Isaac Seumalo when he gets here. And Wisnewski's going to, as I said, he's going to be the game day backup on the interior. So when you can only dress 46 on Sundays, that means you probably are only going to have 2 extra offensive linemen, and you got to have an interior one, and you got to have a swing tackle, and Wisnewski's going to be that interior backup that can go in and play any of those 3 positions.
John, going back to the Bradford stuff, one of the questions that he was asked today, and I want you kind of to to comment on this a little bit, was, does he need to get on the same page with his coordinators? Like, it was kind of presented to him like, Frank Reich says one thing, you sound like you're saying something else. What did he have to say about that?
Well, that's what I was saying about there's certain people in the fan base and in the media, too, who are looking at this black and white and saying, is it an open competition or isn't it? And what Doug was trying to say, and a lot of people criticize him for it because he doesn't win press conferences with the lightning fast quips like Chip Kelly does. But what he was trying to explain was the fact that, look, Sam Bradford's my starting quarterback, but this is the National Football League. We drafted a guy number 2 overall. We have a very highly paid backup. It's their job to compete and push the number 1 guy. And if they completely outplay him, well, then all of a sudden something that is on paper as Sam Bradford is the starter changes. So I don't think there's a big difference between what Doug is saying and what Frank Reich is saying. I think the difference is people's understanding of it and sort of jumping to conclusions and believing Frank is saying it's a wide open competition and the head coach is saying something differently. I don't think that's the case, and that's what Doug was trying to explain.
John's with us here. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter for more from John on the NFL. And, one of the things, too, was the running back spot. We talked a lot about wideouts yesterday, but he was asked about looking at the running backs. Kind of hard to evaluate them, but what is their role in this offense? How is the running back role in this offense different than the running back role in Chip Kelly's offense?
Well, I think you're going to have a more well-rounded guy. They prefer to have somebody who can do all 3 things and sort of be a 3-down back. But a lot of the running style is going to be the same. It's going to be inside zone, outside zone. I think their preference is to have one bell cow, so to speak, and that's the issue because really we talk about it constantly with Ryan Matthews and his injury concerns. And all of a sudden, Kenyon Barner's splitting first-team reps with him. That's a concern for me. I don't know about everybody else because Kenyon's a very nice person, and but there's been no evidence that he could be a starting running back in the NFL. And all of a sudden, if you look past those 2 guys, then it's Wendell Smallwood, who's a 5th-round rookie. So I think they have these grandiose expectations about having a Jamal Charles type that can play all 3 downs and play them all effectively. But right now, the talent just doesn't indicate that's on hand.
John McMullen's with us here talking Eagles football. And, John, what did Doug Peterson have to say about Jordan Matthews on the outside? Does he see him more there or better inside?
Well, he said he was better inside, but that's obvious. We all knew that. And I think that's another one people kind of took and ran with in the fact that he actually used that wording and said he's a better inside receiver, which we all understand and we all know, but that doesn't mean he's not going to move around. And it's already very clear by the way the Eagles have run practice that he will be on the outside. He's been told outside, and hopefully he's very excited about it. Hopefully he can be effective doing that. But when the question is Jordan better on the inside, outside? Well, we already know that. He's a better inside slot receiver, and that's why Chip Kelly had him there. But to be more effective and to take the next step in his career, you can't be pigeonholed because, Julio Jones does certain things better, believe it or not. He's better on the outside than in the slot. Doesn't mean the Atlanta Falcons don't line him up in the slot because you're trying to get the best matchups for him each and every week against a particular corner you think he has a bigger advantage over, and that's where the Eagles are moving forward with Jordan Matthews. But as far as what he does better as a skill set, yeah, he's certainly better on the inside.
John, one thing, too, we said yesterday we talked a lot about the receivers. One guy that we didn't talk a lot about was Chris Gibbons, and he talked a little about his impressions of Gibbons, who worked with Bradford in St. Louis and had his best year there.
Yeah, and they know each other, and they're trying to get that sort of rapport back on the field. And Chris is one of those guys, and if you think about it, ever since Deshaun Jackson has left, we talk about it, the Eagles really haven't had a legitimate deep threat. And I don't want to put that mantle on him because he's not a receiver nearly as good or as talented as Deshaun. But what he does do is stretch the football field. He's got tremendous deep speed, and his issues are the other things, in that he doesn't run great routes underneath, and he's not going to be a move the change type. But as far as getting somebody on the field that can scare that safety on the back end of the defense and make them back up a few steps, I think that's what Chris can offer this team. And it's going to be a specialty. He's not going to be out there for 60, 70 plays a game, but I do think he's going to make this football team because he offers them something they haven't had in a very long time.
All right, John will be live at the mandatories. It's mandatory that John's there, otherwise he's fined as well. We fine him $1 a day for not showing up. Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN, at JF McMullen on Twitter, and more at 97.3ESPN.com, as John McMullen writes. And you can read Peterson cracks the door at QB. Read about it at 97.3ESPN.com. Have a great weekend, John. Hope you're back to 100% by next week.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, guys.